Shirley MacLaine didn't reveal this shocking information until '91. She concealed the true nature of what transpired behind the scenes in interviews for decades, all the while grinning. She now exposes the true reason behind her desire for distinct publicity tours, various filming dates, and even separate trailers. From screaming matches on set. Hollywood's most brutally honest star is not holding anything back from the envious rivalries that turned movie sets into battlefields. In the midst of the Great Depression, Shirley MacLaine was born in Richmond, Virginia. To support the family, her father held multiple jobs. He assisted in school administration, taught psychology, and, when necessary, marketed real estate. Her mother, who was from Canada, had a history in theater. Later, Shirley's entire destiny would be shaped by that influence. She was named after Shirley Temple, who at the time was already well known as a child star. It had the feel of a sign. Despite having a different spelling of their last name, her younger brother Warren Beatty would also make it to Hollywood. Due to her dad's employment changes, the family traveled frequently when she was growing up, from town to town around Virginia. Shirley grew up as a Baptist. However, she would later develop a deeper spiritual faith. She was more than merely artistic as a child. She was also athletic. She also played baseball with the boys, and since she hit more home runs than any of them, she was given the nickname Powerhouse. However, Shirley had an ankle issue before to all of that. She kept falling because they were weak. Her mother enrolled her in ballet classes to address this. What began as treatment became a fixation. She adored it. She never skipped a class while training at the Washington School of Ballet. Because she was taller than the other girls, she frequently played masculine roles in plays. She even fractured her ankle backstage during one performance, but she nevertheless adjusted her shoes and continued dancing. Shirley was tough, determined, and never gave up. Nevertheless, she finally came to the realization that she literally lacked the proper footing for ballet. So she turned her back on it. She wasted no time in determining what to do next. She traveled to New York for auditions before even graduating from high school. After landing a small part in a Subway adaptation of Oklahoma, she became permanently enamored with theater. She relocated from Arlington to New York City as soon as she graduated in 1952. She changed her name because it was too difficult for producers to pronounce, Shirley MacLaine Beatty. She went by Shirley MacLaine, her mother's maiden name. Soon, that new name would be visible. She began in Me and Juliet by Rodgers and Hammerstein, in the chorus. People took notice of her despite the fact that she was just another background dancer. Then she fired. She was hired for the Pajama Game as an understudy. Shirley had to step in after Carol Haney, the lead, was hurt. It was a life-altering event rather than merely a fortunate break. Producer Halbia Wallace, who happened to be in the crowd, was blown away by her performance. A few months later, it occurred once more. Shirley stepped in, Haney was hurt, and Wallace moved this time. Shirley moved from being a backup dancer to a Hollywood actress in an instant. Wallace proposed to sign her to a 5-year Paramount contract. It was the 1950s. Hollywood's old-school studio was still in existence, but the fractures were beginning to appear. Wallace was known for seeing stars before others did, and Shirley was no exception. She never even had a chance to get comfortable. She arrived in Vermont after 3 months. Making her film debut in The Trouble with Harry, directed by none other than Alfred Hitchcock. Shirley earned a Golden Globe for Best New Actress because of her innovative performance in this strange, dark comedy. She went to the races after that. The Star-Studded Around the World in 80 Days was her next major role. The fact that Shirley was pregnant while the movie was being filmed was unknown at the time. Soon later, she gave birth to Sachi, her daughter. However, Shirley and her husband, Steve Parker, decided that Sachi would reside in Japan with her father and his lover while Shirley concentrated on her work, rather than remaining at home. It was an odd arrangement that would eventually lead to intense conflict between mother and daughter. Her breakthrough as a serious actor came in 1958. She was specially chosen by Frank Sinatra to play Ginny in Some Came Running. Marilyn Monroe was scheduled to play the role, but Shirley took over when it didn't work out. She kept in character off camera, brought a plush puppy to set, threw herself fully into the role, and did a fantastic job. Sinatra was an experienced performer. Predicting that it would help her receive an Oscar nomination, he instructed the director to have her character die in the movie. He was correct. Shirley received her first Academy Award nomination for the performance, demonstrating that she was more than just a funny actor. Things weren't that glamorous behind the scenes, though. According to reports, Wallace, the man who had found her, made unwanted approaches. Shirley claims that when he once pushed himself on her, she gave him a hard slap in return. She ultimately prevailed in her lawsuit against him for breach of contract. Years later, after a Hollywood reporter published something derogatory about her, she struck him in the mouth. She refused to be pushed about, as seen by the tale that made headlines. She collaborated with actor Jack Lemmon and director Billy Wilder by 1960 on The Apartment, which would go on to become one of the most famous movies of the time. Her role was that of Fran Q. Bellick, a weak woman entangled in a convoluted professional romance. The film was an enormous hit. Shirley received her second nomination for Best Actress out of 10 Oscar nominations. Although she didn't win that year, her performance will never be forgotten. For the part, she did receive international recognition and honors. Shirley gave the black and white movie the appearance of color years later, according to Charlize Theron. Shirley MacLaine was in the epicenter of Hollywood's golden age in the 1960s. She wasn't just another attractive person trying to get famous. In terms of the roles she selected and the stories she wished to tell, she was taking significant risks. She stunned everyone in 1961 when she starred in The Children's Hour. It was a daring step. She portrayed Martha Doby, a woman who subtly revealed her love for Audrey Hepburn's character, her best friend. It was controversial at the time to even allude to a lesbian connection. Homosexuality was still classified as sexual deviance under the Hays Code. Therefore, MacLaine's actions were not only dangerous but also revolutionary. She then disclosed that she and Hepburn never even discussed the central idea of the novel, which was even more shocking. It was clear from that stillness that the topic was still frowned upon. MacLaine's character commits suicide at the tragic finale of the movie. And regrettably, that started to happen frequently in Hollywood. Get rid of the gay character. Nevertheless, she had unlocked a door that others were terrified to open. MacLaine took a totally different turn and featured in Irma la Douce just 2 years later, in 1963. People adored her portrayal of a sweet Parisian prostitute this time. She was nominated for another Oscar and won a Golden Globe for her performance in the part. Her level of preparation for the role is what truly sticks out. In order to gain a deeper understanding of the life of a real sex worker, she and Jack Lemmon actually spent time with him. The woman had to leave the meeting midway to attend to a client since it was so genuine. Despite only costing $5 million to produce, the film made over $25 million at the box office. That's equivalent to earning hundreds of millions of dollars today. She left after reading offensive remarks made about her by the filmmaker, even though it might have been a Marilyn Monroe movie. MacLaine seized the opportunity and made it memorable. It paid off even though Lemmon had been cautioned against it due to the pimp persona. The movie set records in the Netherlands. Nearly 1/3 of the nation witnessed it. Then, in 1969, came Sweet Charity. MacLaine was the driving force behind it, not just the star. She brought it all together, pushed for Bob Fosse to be the director, and offered the idea to Universal. Despite Fosse's lack of filmmaking experience, MacLaine had faith in him. He had given her a tremendous break years ago, and now she was giving it back. The project cost $20 million in those days, or $150 million in today's currency. It also demonstrated her courage, despite the fact that it didn't generate much revenue. The original Broadway part was written for Gwen Verdon, which is crazy. Fosse's spouse, but she was not given the role. The studio wanted a more well-known moniker. That name was MacLaine. The outcome was legendary. She honed her dance skills from her early days on stage, and her performance in the tune If My Friends Could See Me Now is still spoken about today. Things weren't going smoothly behind the scenes. The producer wanted something brighter, but Fosse wanted to maintain the rough, raw tone. MacLaine remained by Fosse's side the entire time. MacLaine maintained her star power in spite of all the risks she took. She received 5 Golden Globe nominations and 2 wins during the 1960s. Because of their regard for her, the studio supported her decisions, including replacing a top producer on Sweet Charity who didn't agree with Fosse. It was uncommon for any actor to have such effect, particularly a woman in the time period. She also pursued more than just money. In the early 1970s, she left Hollywood to back George McGovern's presidential campaign. She was among the most paid actresses in the industry at the end of the decade. Huge contracts, including $750,000 for a project that never even got made, were given to her. In today's currency, that is more than $6 million. Merely to preserve her name. Steve Parker proposed to Shirley MacLaine 4 hours after they first met in a pub in Manhattan in 1952. It was passionate, impetuous, and intensely romantic. They took their time getting married. She continued to work as an understudy in the Pajama Game while attempting to break on Broadway. However, they eventually were married in 1954. Just as her career in Hollywood was ready to take off, their relationship would suffer as a result of that success. "I'll always be Mr. MacLaine if I stay in Hollywood," Parker once told her. In order to establish himself as a film producer, he relocated to Japan in 1956. And they lived on different continents after that. Nevertheless, they remained wed for 28 years. Retaining what MacLaine subsequently referred to as her core relationship, despite the incomprehensibility of the outside world. Sachi, their daughter, was born in the same year. For a brief period, they appeared to be the ideal family, and Shirley described it as life-changing. However, Shirley was a Hollywood firebrand, producing 25 films in 15 years. She co-starred with icons Audrey Hepburn, Dean Martin, and Frank Sinatra. She didn't even consider staying at home. She claimed that if she had given up acting to become a full-time mother, everyone would have been much more frustrated. Her relationship with Sachi was influenced by that worldview, and when Sachi shared her side of the story decades later, it all came to light. The marriage between Shirley and Steve was unusual from the start. They were practicing open marriage long before the term was widely used. She gave a straightforward explanation. He was a resident of Japan. She was an American. They stayed in touch while doing what they wanted. Shirley didn't feel guilty about it. She was forthright about the men she dated. Politicians, actors, and even 1 or 2 prime ministers. She didn't care that people didn't understand. She believed that the marriage continued because of that freedom. Sachi was subsequently moved to live with her father in Japan full-time when she was just 6 years old. Shirley's motivations included a drunken nanny, kidnapping stories, and the conviction that Hollywood wasn't a kid-safe place. She only spent the summers with her kid. Sachi said at the time that she never experienced abandonment. But the story evolved as she grew older. She claimed to have felt neglected and alone in her 2013 memoir. She related stories of being cut off from money, of spending Christmas alone at boarding school, and of a job offer Shirley made up to end one of Sachi's romances. The harm had already been done when Shirley referred to the book as primarily fictitious. Shirley had startled the public with yet another confession years before. She acknowledged on Oprah's show in 2011 that she had slept with 3 different people in one day during a political campaign in the 1970s because she didn't want to be left out. It wasn't an act. She was simply a part of it. She confessed of falling in love with her co-stars, but she pointed the finger at Jack Nicholson because he was too scary and Jack Lemmon because he was too sweet. She had stopped pursuing males by that point. Terry, her rat terrier, had grown to be her best friend. She was serious when she said, "I'd rather have a funny, loyal dog than a man." Her career remained as daring as her wild off-screen life. She co-starred with Clint Eastwood in 2 Mules for Sister Sarah in 1970, and the two got along poorly right away. She was said to be unfeminine by director Don Siegel. She had too many balls, they remarked. Tension was sensed by all on set, and to make matters worse, the majority of the crew fell ill in Mexico. Even though the movie was profitable, it was Clint Eastwood's final appearance in a supporting role. Perhaps that was influenced by the encounter with Shirley. She then shocked everyone by creating a documentary about China in 1975. The nation had just recently begun to open up to the West, and it was undoubtedly granted unique access to film daily life there. The outcome, The Other Half of the Sky, was impactful and even nominated for an Oscar. It revealed a side of her that her audience had never seen before, a lady with a global perspective and political consciousness in addition to being an actress. After a lengthy hiatus from acting, she revealed that new side. She was almost absent from Hollywood from 1970 to 1977. She wasn't idle, though. She visited isolated locations, lived among African tribes, traveled throughout India, and even scaled mountains in Bhutan. She wasn't only taking in the scenery. These were spiritual expeditions. She became interested in philosophy, reincarnation, and meditation. Critics saw the transformation when she returned at the pivotal moment. She had stopped being the clown. She possessed quiet, depth, and a deeper quality. Even so, her return wasn't without its problems. She had an argument with director Herbert Ross on the set of The Turning Point. He seemed cocky to her. They quarreled about the portrayal of her character. She aimed to depict the mental anguish of a mom who sacrificed all for her family. She was familiar with the story. Despite receiving 11 nominations for Oscars, the movie was a success. However, it demonstrated that Shirley MacLaine was no longer merely acting. Both off-screen and on-screen, she was speaking the truth. The early 1980s were more than just a career high for Shirley MacLaine. Hollywood is still shaken by the drama, controversy, and feuds that raged during that time. It all began in 1980 while Anthony Hopkins was filming A Change of Seasons. What started out as a love story devolved into a chilly conflict between two celebrities who could hardly look at one another. Afterwards, Hopkins claimed that Shirley was the most annoying actress he had ever collaborated with. Their personalities and acting styles clashed, and the production even failed when the director was removed in the middle of filming. In order to keep the sequences apart, the crew had to arrange them. And Shirley didn't hesitate to respond when questioned about him decades later. "I also don't like him." However, that was nothing in comparison to what followed. The real fireworks started when Shirley adopted phrases of endearment in 1983. Deborah Winger co-starred with her. Younger, more untamed, and prepared to compete for all available screen real estate. Sparks flew as soon as they met. Shirley appeared wearing a miniskirt, heels, combat boots, and fur coats reminiscent of movie stars. James L. Brooks, the director, did nothing to stop it. In the hopes that it might result in chemistry on camera, he let the mayhem unfold. Perhaps it did. Off camera, however, the scene became a battleground. Shouting bouts took place. Both actresses refused to leave their trailer, wasting hours. There were also instances that nobody could believe ever happened, such as when Winger left to practice, turned around, raised her skirt, and farted at Shirley. Or the time Jack Nicholson stood motionless next to them as she licked Shirley's leg. She would arrive late merely to annoy Shirley, make fun of her advanced age, and cause trouble whenever she had the chance. Years later, Winger smirked and stated, "There was something true in there," without refuting it. The competition for top billing followed. First, Winger wanted her name. Shirley had a history, decades of experience, and nominations for Oscars. Winger wasn't scared to push and had a hot streak. Paramount had to intervene and make a settlement because things had become so terrible. Shirley would have top billing in the US and soaring status abroad. However, the harm had already been done. They had to be kept apart for the press junkets. They were seated at opposite ends of the theater for the debut. Hollywood was a flurry. Everyone was aware that this was a war, not just a movie. However, Shirley prevailed in the last round. The two actresses were seated in the same room on April 9, 1984. In the running for Best Actress. It was more than just an honor when Laurence Olivier opened the envelope and announced Shirley MacLaine's name. It was a knockout blow. "I deserve this," she said as she stepped to the stage and held her Oscar. Winger made an effort to grin. It failed to land. She received a commendation from Shirley, who described her performance as turbulent brilliance. But everyone knew it came off as sharp. It was done. Both on and off screen, Shirley had prevailed. Her off-screen life was also changing that year. After being married to Steve Parker since 1954, she finally completed her divorce. In what she called an open marriage, they had resided on different continents. He remained in Japan. She was employed in Hollywood. Sachi, their daughter, spent the majority of her childhood with her father. And her memoir, written years later, would reveal the deep wounds. Shirley, however, continued to refer to Parker as the love of her life after it ended before coming out on a limb. She published the book that completely changed her reputation in 1983. Acting wasn't the point. It dealt with ghosts, UFOs, past lives, and out-of-body experiences. The book became a bestseller. As well as a joke. Letterman made fun of her. Clapping back, she called him a jerk. Despite the laughter, people continued to read. Additionally, 30 million people watched the 1987 ABC miniseries based on the book. Shirley was shown meeting aliens, channeling spirits, and traveling to the moon. Critics couldn't understand. The audiences were divided. Shirley didn't flinch, though. She told Larry King that it was all real. The strangest thing was that she meant every word. Shirley later claimed to have been the spiritual sibling of a 35,000-year-old warrior spirit named Ramtha, to have lived in Atlantis, and to have been murdered by her ex-husband in a previous incarnation as a Mongolian nomad. Inspired by a woman chatting with an old dialect and drinking red wine. Carl Sagan referred to it as absurd. Her admirers weren't entirely sure. Shirley, though? She simply continued, unrepentant and completely unafraid. Hollywood icon Shirley MacLaine had a lengthy and illustrious career. However, Sachi Parker, her daughter, had a completely different life behind the scenes. One of separation, bewilderment, and heartache. Sachi was taken to live with her father in Japan when she was just 2 years old. While her father struggled with alcoholism, she was reared by a governess instead of either parent. In the meantime, Shirley was occupied with becoming a worldwide celebrity, rarely traveling and never being fully present. Each visit felt less like a reunion with a mother and more like a meeting with a stranger. Sachi attempted to understand her peculiar background as she grew older. In the hopes of finding some sort of closure or maybe strengthening her relationship with her mother, she ultimately shared her story in a memoir called Lucky Me. However, what she disclosed was anything but typical. She related how Shirley informed her that her true father was an astronaut in another galaxy and that her father was a clone. Shirley called the book fiction and completely rejected it. Sachi, however, maintained her account. The emotional gap between them simply widened in spite of her efforts. She acknowledged that the joyful ending she had always dreamed of was probably not going to happen. Shirley was going through a creative renaissance while that period of her life was coming to an end in the media. She portrayed Mary Kay Ash in Hell on Heels in 2002. A movie about the cosmetics business. She received accolades from critics for her witty and amusing performance, which even earned her a Golden Globe nomination. Shirley reminded everyone that her skill was still very much alive by bringing the character to life with elegance and confidence. Then, in 2005, Shirley made a spectacular comeback to the big screen. According to rumors, she starred in 3 major motion pictures in the same year, including Bewitched and In Her Shoes. She portrayed a variety of roles, including sage, direct grandmothers, and enchanted matriarchs. Her career was rekindled by these roles, which also brought her in front of a younger audience. Her parts in Valentine's Day, Closing the Ring, and Bernie kept her busy during the ensuing years, demonstrating that her passion had not diminished with age. By 2012, Shirley had taken yet another surprising action. She became a member of the Downton Abbey cast. Her portrayal as Martha Levinson, the boisterous and self-assured American mother-in-law, caused a sensation in the prim and proper British home. Fans loved her scenes with Maggie Smith because they were witty and showed a clash of cultures. Shirley claimed that prior to being cast, she had not even seen the show. Once on the set, however, she was thrilled to be a part of the production and appreciated its elegance. She received accolades and recognition as she worked harder. In 1998, she received the Cecil B. DeMille Award from the Golden Globes. Celebrities like Jack Nicholson and Julia Roberts attended her 2012 AFI Life Achievement Award ceremony. Then, in 2013, she received the Kennedy Center distinction from President Obama. These weren't only awards. They honored her lifelong commitment to the arts, spanning from her early Broadway days to her last movie roles. Shirley MacLaine is 90 years old and remains unabashed and fearless. Hollywood took notice after she just made a confession. Working with Anthony Perkins was unbearable for her. In 1958, the two starred together in The Matchmaker. However, things weren't that lovely behind the scenes. Perkins received $75,000 for performing the identical work, while she received $25,000. Paradoxically, it was Perkins who advocated for her to get equal compensation. However, that did not improve their relationship on set. Shirley claimed that being near him constantly made her uncomfortable. They just didn't have the same vibe. She once claimed that she was unable to determine Perkins' true identity. She acknowledged, "I'm not sure what constitutes an act and what doesn't." Perkins was quietly struggling with his identity at the time, and the studio was pressuring him to break up with Tab Hunter and even undergo conversion therapy. Although Shirley was unaware of the whole situation at the time, their separation had a profound effect. She is not attempting to make amends for the past today. She's accepted and even enjoys her need for isolation. She stated unequivocally in her biography, "I'm over all that she would rather have her small puppy, Terry, than a guy." She wasn't kidding. She even co-wrote the book Out on a Leash with that rat terrier because of their close relationship. Her voice alternates with the dogs in each chapter as they discuss everything from alien life to homosexual rights. Even though that sounds odd, it must have worked. She asserted that their relationship was more profound than most people realize. She even thought that they had already had a life in ancient Egypt. That's undoubtedly the case, always winking while fusing the personal and the otherworldly. She continues to write today. Her latter works cross the boundaries between spiritual insight and Hollywood gossip with their unvarnished honesty, odd thoughts, and reflections. She discussed growing older, challenging medicine, and embracing practices like homeopathy and acupuncture in saging while aging. She was able to explore these ideas more thoroughly after relocating to a peaceful home near Santa Fe. She frequently discusses synchronicity and how life's strange tiny coincidences could be clues to something bigger. Without a doubt, life has always involved more than just wealth or celebrity. Knowing who we are, why we are here, and what lies ahead has been the focus. She is among the few who continue to wonder, what about the soul, in a world where technology is advancing at a breakneck pace? And perhaps that explains why people are still paying attention after all these years.